So I'm joined today by my good friend since junior high school, Matthew Nagler, and we are talking about cognitive flexibility. And true to form, in terms of cognitive flexibility, our conversation wanders all over the place. So I found it interesting. I think Matt found it interesting. I hope you find it interesting as well. Without further ado, Matthew Nagler, welcome back to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you, Howie. It's good to be back.
So we're going to talk about cognitive flexibility. You wrote an article on your Substack a while back now. We've been playing a little bit of tag, trying to find a date to talk about it. Before we get to that, what else are you thinking about these days? So maybe the cognitive flexibility can also fold into any new and up and coming thoughts, because I love just that we have conversations where we just sort of, wander in the back roads of our minds.
Yeah, so I'm still thinking about the endowment effect, which I think so much about it that I assume everybody's always thinking about it. But most people don't even know what I'm talking about when I say I'm thinking about the endowment effect. But as I may have actually possibly described at one of your previous podcasts, the endowment effect is this result, or it's been found in numerous experiments that when a person possesses an object, they are the value they place on that object. In other words, the amount that they would be, the minimum amount they'd be willing to accept to part with it in trade is significantly greater than what, in a similar situation, they would be willing to pay if they didn't have the object. So, like, for example, if I gave you a Cornell t-shirt, you might say, oh, no, I wouldn't give this up for anything less than $30. But if I hadn't given that to you, you might say, oh, I wouldn't be willing to pay any more than $20 for this. And so that may, kind of quirky and funny, but in fact, it's been demonstrated in countless experiments with many, many different types of goods, products, even intangibles, that this exists. And I've got a couple of studies that have looked at that. One they're both over now. One that's kind of a paper that's been written up already, and another one that Ben Ho of Vassar College and I are currently writing up. We're looking at how this relates to altruism in particular.
Okay. I was going to say that probably explains the very low rates of infidelity in couples.
Interesting. Yes. Huh. Well, but how do you explain the much greater rate of infidelity in France? Do they not have the endowment effect in France?
Maybe they're less well endowed. Uh-oh. I just got a bad rating on YouTube.
You just think of a song that you used to sing in French, but we shouldn't probably do that on the podcast. He's speaking about well endowed.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also wondering if the endowment effect has anything to do with the fact that maybe it's tangentially related, that I live in a town where bicycles get stolen a lot. So I bought two of the worst bikes I've ever seen. They're folding bikes, but they're, old, rusty. The gear shifts don't really work. For one of them, the handlebar leans about 15 degrees over to the right, which I feel like a skilled circus clown. But the lock that I bought is like worth more than both bikes put together. I'm wondering if there's any, like, as I think about, like, I value the lock more than the bicycles, which feels weird.
Well, what this illustrates, I mean, that does sound like the endowment effect, but it illustrates in particular one of, I guess, sort of the leading explanation for why we have the endowment effect, which is loss aversion. And that's, the idea that that people hate to lose things, that losing something is much, much worse than the pleasure you get from gaining something of similar value. So, like, imagine this. Imagine you discover a $20 bill on the sidewalk. That you'd be pretty happy if you found that. But if you instead lost, well, let's say you find it, and then like an hour later, you realize you've lost it. You might feel worse than you did when you started the day. And in fact, most most people would. And that illustrates loss aversion, that it's just so much worse to lose something than it is to gain something of similar value. And so, with these bikes that have almost no value, you just hate the idea of losing something, even if it's got a bent out of shape handlebar. You just, God, if I had to lose this thing, that would be, I'd be such a loser, right?
So last week I was in Sardinia, Italy, and playing in an ultimate tournament. So when I wasn't playing in an ultimate tournament, there was little I could do except lay in bed and wish I was 40 years younger. So they had a TV in the hotel room, and very, very limited range of shows. But one of them was, I guess, the Italian version of Deal or No Deal, which I had never seen.
Love that.
I
talked to my behavioral economics students about that. I love that show.
So I don't know how much I actually understood of what was going on, but it seems like, there's the woman who's playing, there's all these different boxes, and then she gets to choose, does she keep this box? Does she trade it with someone else? And she ended up accepting a deal of like 50,000 euros. And at the end, and this was like the last box, she took this deal, and there was only one box. She had one box and somebody else had one box, and it was either like 0 or 200,000. And it turns out that she had the box with 200,000. And so the story I was telling myself was, woman wins $200,000, goes home miserable.
So wait, she went home miserable because she traded that box, or she kept it?
She accepted the deal of 50,000 instead of either box. Right.
Right. And because she would have had 200,000 had she not done that. She walked home with $50,000 and she was miserable.
Yeah. And I thought,
well, right. Two things going on there. One of them is loss aversion, right? Because you know that you lost something. And so she's indexed this in her mind, not as a $50,000 gain, but as a $150,000 loss. She benchmarked that against, this is what we call a reference point. Loss aversion always relates to a reference point. So if your reference point is, I would have walked away with $200,000 and you walk away with 50,000, then the headline is lady loses $150,000. It's not lady gains $50,000, right? It's all about reference point. That's what creates the mental headline. But the other thing that's going on there relates to something called omission commission bias, which I think is, I'm trying to remember his first name now. I think it's Dan Gilovich. I can't remember. Anyway, psychologist named Gilovich at Cornell University, who was there, a psychologist there when I was at Cornell, and I think just retired very recently. Did a lot of research on omission commission bias, that people tend to feel worse when something happens because of something that they did not do rather than something that they did. We prefer to take actions. Actually, I'm trying to think how that relates to this particular example, because I'm sure the lady felt very bad, but in some sense, it's because she took an action that was a bad action, right? But I think that what the research shows is that people feel worse when they failed to take an action that would have made them better off. So, and so this results in the recommendation that sort of pop psychologists make, that, you're thinking about doing something, do it, go for it, right? You'll regret not doing it. So you're thinking about making a change in your life, just go for it, be bold, right? Your regret will be much worse if you don't take the action.
But as I was trying to, it was fun to watch Deal or No Deal in Italian because there was so much I didn't understand. So I was telling myself stories about what was going on, and the more I watched, we watched like for 3 days. So I was starting to, and then I looked it up, like what are the American rules? And so I was, but at the beginning, no idea what's going on. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what would I do? Like when I would say that to myself, it was always like, what's the rational thing to do? So then I realized like there is no rational thing to do. There's no objective, because like the question is like, how much does she need the 50,000? Right? Like if they'd
Right.
given her a, like, well, here's 12,000, we'll buy you off with 12,000. It kind of depends on, your own sensitivity to gain or loss, rather than an objective.
Yeah.
Okay, let's add up all the prizes, divide by the number of prizes, and that's the average they should give you.
Right. Well, what you're observing there is that rationality depends upon your income level. So it is important to consider, when you consider a person's risk aversion, to consider, well, it's not even income level. It's really wealth. It's like, what do you have? When you go home, what do you have? And so a rational person, when making these decisions on the show, should decide, taking into account, really what their entire net worth is. The point of fact, I don't think that's what people do. I think they go into these shows, and I don't know if that really, I think it figures into some degree. I bet if you studied this, people would behave differently. If you measure everybody's net worth, I think you'd see differences in behavior. But I think that people kind of get in the zone of the show, and then they start playing this kind of, almost in isolation from whatever their reality is. And in fact, it's almost like, in fact, people become very narrowly framed on exactly what the situation is in that moment. So it's like, for example, this is why this lady probably felt terrible that she had a loss of $150,000 relative to what she would have had. That's very narrowly framed, I mean, if she kind of panned back and sort of, thought about her situation, maybe she's got a net worth of, several $1 million. What does this even matter? Maybe it's not even a blip. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I'm sure she feels really bad because she's really narrowly framed it.
But also, we had to talk about an article you wrote about experiencing versus remembering self. And like, it looked like it was a great time to be on the show. Like, and I think that a lot of them, you say you reject the deal. And then in the Italian show, he writes it out on a marker, and then they shred it slowly. And the audience goes wild because now it's more exciting.
Right. That's interesting. They do that on the Italian show. I don't remember anything like that on the American show.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's like, it's like, okay, so I didn't win anything, but I had a hell of a half an hour.
It's not the same host, is it? Because in the American, it used to be Howie. It was a Howie Mandel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, this was an Italian guy.
Oh, okay. So they actually shred this big piece of paper. That's reminiscent of this episode of BoJack Horseman, where he's on a show where you can decide whether to give $1 million to charity, or or I can't remember what it is. He has this decision of whether to give $1 million to charity or throw it into this vat where it'll be burned, and he decides to throw it into the vat to be burned instead.
I want to say one more thing, because those two bicycles were not my only bicycle. I had another bicycle that was nicer, that wasn't folding. It was, it was just a better bike. I got it for like 110 euros used, and it was stolen from the train station. And I came back after Frisbee practice, really tired, and I went and I looked, and the bike was gone. And I decided in that moment that, I'm a wealthy American living in Spain, so relatively, like I'm not wealthy, but compared to most of the people in Spain, I have more money than they do, or I did before the dollar tanked. And I decided that kind of theft was a tax that was, that I didn't want to rail against that kind of theft, and not rail against sort of, the corporate theft that goes on all the time with the capitalist system. And I felt pretty good about like, okay, so it's like I'm renting the bicycle, like I don't know if you've read Terry Pratchett books, the Discworld books.
No.
Fantastic series. But in his world, they have guilds, and one of them is the Thieves Guild. And the idea is if everyone pays their taxes to the Thieves Guild, then the thieves don't steal from you. And it's it's just a lot safer. And and if anyone is caught stealing without a Thieves Guild license,
that's literally an insurance contract. And in fact, it's an insurance contract sort of more on organized crime. So it sounds, it's something that actually exists, right? So you can pay certain people and then they won't beat you up or they won't do something bad to you. And so it's kind of what it does is if you're risk averse, here, just make this payment and then you don't have to worry about the chance that something bad might happen. It's like nice podcast you have. What if something bad should happen to it?
No, I definitely recommend the Discworld series. It's if you like.
That's been around for decades.
Yeah, I think it started in the 80s, and he died, I think, in 2015 or 2016. So you can, so we're.
While you're recommending a fantasy series, I just read The Will of the Many by I think it's John Islington. Amazing book, and it's the first in what's going to be a series. Apparently, it's a couple months till the second one comes out. This was really amazing. It's kind of the world building in some of these new fantasy novels and series is amazing. And in this one is really no exception. The world is sort of almost like a Roman Empire kind of world in which there's a hierarchy in society, and the hierarchy is actually, it's got a lot of teeth to it because those people who are lower in the hierarchy submit their will to the people who are higher up. And that literally means that their will is actually somehow magically sucked out of them and it empowers the people that are higher in the hierarchy, who actually become stronger because of it and are able to have these powers that people lower in the hierarchy don't have. Ooh. So it's really pretty fantastic.
Wow. Were we in the same social studies class where they played was it Star Power? Do you remember? Remember that?
Think so. Was this senior year?
I thought it might have been junior high. I think it might have been Mrs. Curtin.
Oh, Mrs. Curtin? That sounds vaguely familiar, but it's not. It sounds familiar in the sense of somebody else did it, not me. Somebody else being my junior high aged self. Who's like another person.
I remember this, and it was a trading game, and you start out randomly getting some beads, but then with every successive trading round, the people with the more beads are deemed worthier. And so they get to change the rules. And
yes, I remember that. That's right.
And I'm so happy that I was one of the plebes. I was on the lower class because, then I could remain morally pure. I was just like, oh, those people, like I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. So yeah, I remember that. It's funny looking back on that. I don't recall having any clue that was about the real world. It is. But when I was 13, what did I know? I was like, no, the real world is fair, but this is kind of a cool game.
All right, well let's talk about cognitive flexibility, and I love how you start the article by talking about it in very sort of productionist terms, like cognitive flexibility is a useful trait that helps you succeed in life. So maybe let's start there. How does when you started thinking about cognitive flexibility, how did it come to you?
Yeah, so cognitive flexibility, I've been thinking a lot about this because in some ways it's kind of a bit of an autobiographical interest in that I've noticed that I don't know. I feel like I've changed as I've gotten older, and more recently, I've sort of started to believe that more things are possible than I used to believe. I kind of lived a lot of my life, I think, thinking that the way things were and the way I was doing things was the way they had to be, So like I would adopt a certain habit, like a certain diet or something like that, and I'd be very rigid about it. And I would think this is the way it has to be, and then like things would happen, like things happen in the world, things that are exogenous to your own decisions. And if you have this kind of rigid mindset, you feel like, oh, I just have, well, wait, things have to be this way. I have to keep on, eating what I'm eating or being in the job that I'm in, doing what it is I'm doing. But over time, I've learned, and it's been gradual over the course of my life, that really, that you can make decisions that I would never have believed you could just do that. It's like, wow, can you actually really just decide to do that? And granted, it's not true everywhere in the world. It's true in societies where you have the freedom to do this. But I've found that it's remarkable. So like, for example, when I was 37 years old, after working 10 years in the private sector, after getting my PhD when I was about 27, I decided to go back and to academia, which is something nobody did. I mean, people would get their PhDs and then start an academic career. And if you didn't go immediately into academia, if you did something like I did, like consulting, and then work in government and the private sector, it was like something nobody is like, no, you can't go back, But I was like, what if I try to do this? And I did it. And so I've kind of learned, that was one thing that kind of taught me, but other decisions that I've made have taught me that, and I know we have these very pat expressions like thinking outside the box, but you can really, a lot more is possible if you kind of open your mind to it. So I thought, is it possible that there are people with differing levels of this trait, or maybe at different points in their lives, but and then what does it mean? How should we think about it, about the decisions that they make, and about just in individually, and then in the context of other people, and how it affects the welfare of themselves and of other people.
Yeah, I resonate with that for a while in my life. Like I was just on the conveyor belt, right? Like pretty much, everything I did was designed, to move me to the next level. Like I don't think I made an important decision until, after college. And even then, so I was going to teach for a while, but then go back to grad school. And yeah, this idea, and I didn't know anyone who worked in the private sector, or I didn't know anyone who was like open about it. Like everyone, teachers or lawyer, like,
yeah.
Right. So to discover that, like, I thinking about getting a job for some money-making organization felt like impossible. Who do you have to know? Like what kind of secret club do you have to be in?
It's interesting that you say that, Howard, because when I think about sort of where your trajectory has been, I mean, mine's also kind of unusual, but you've had quite an unusual career. It seems to me like you've invented yourself in a lot of ways. You've really sort of decided, to be unconventional. I think it seems to me, at least in America, the vast majority of people get on these kind of career paths, like for example, in the private sector. And then they're, it seems like they spend their entire lives, and this, sort of in the words I think that came out of a commercial, clawing their way up to middle management. And most people assume that's what you do, right? But you have had this very unusual career, and and have done and doing some really remarkable and I'm sure a lot of fun things these days. But you really kind of invented it, and so it's interesting to hear you sort of say it that way.
People talk to me a lot, and when they hear what I do and what I've done, I get a lot that, wow, you're so brave, I could never do that. And I understand where they're coming from, but for me, it almost feels like it's cognitive inflexibility. The idea that I could never work for anybody else. Like I just feel unemployable. And there was like, well, what else am I going to do? I don't know. I'll try this. I'll try that. It's almost like, if you're not in the in group, you have to scrounge around the margins. And
How many people, Bill Gates are like that, sort of think, it's like, I couldn't do this like work-a-day job, so I'm just going to start something up, I'm going to drop out of school and just start this company and just, because there's nothing else I could do.
yeah, if I'd had the work ethic, I might have done something like that. But I like, I've talked to people and I know people who are entrepreneurs, and they, whenever anything happened, they'd be looking like, where's the opportunity? Or they were engineers thinking, how can I make this more efficient? And I've never had either of those impulses. I'm just like, where's the metaphor?
Right.
Where can we play here? What's fun?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think, yeah,
It sounds like it was easier for you. I mean, for me, I kind of had to wander the desert for 10 years. I mean, I got my PhD, and then I'm like, I just want to have a job and be paid. And so that's why I went to the private sector. I was like, okay, consulting, what of the jobs I've been offered, which one pays the most? It's the consulting job. I'm going to take that one. I did that for a few years. It was terrible. And then I just kind of tried other, mainstream kinds of things. I mean, I worked in the federal government for a couple of years, which was actually really a lot of fun. And they were very smart people. That was probably the least conventional, of those things. And then I went to work in the telecommunications industry in marketing for several years. And so I was like, it took me some time to say, why am I doing this? Why am I not doing what I really want to do? And then figuring out a way to do that.
yeah. Well, I would say from 2002 until 2015, I was in marketing, and that was completely the wrong thing. I'd wake up every morning and repeat a mantra like marketing is good, like, so I certainly, have come later to like, it's almost like a fuck it. Like, as I just turned 60, like I don't have that much time left to, 60 years at most to like really make my mark. So I don't know. It feels like an interesting mix of cognitive flexibility and inflexibility in different domains. That certain things I'm flexible about and don't even seem like a big deal, and other things are non-negotiable.
Right. Yeah. So, no, but it's interesting, right? That what appears also on the outside to certain people as having been flexibility, that, you chose a unique path, can seem from the inside like it was the only thing I could do. This reminds me of a quote. I'm going to have to paraphrase a quote of Ursula Le Guin from the Earthsea trilogy, in which she said, a man at first thinks that, that the idea is to have options, to have all these choices open to him, but gradually he learns that there is one thing that he must do. And it's sort of, the idea that wisdom is realizing that it's not about, freedom of choice, but about, figuring out the one path that calls to you, and that's the path you must be on. So it's sort of interesting to think about that and think of it that way. I mean, in some sense, the freedom of choice can be oppressive, and it's kind of when you wake up and, in the morning and say, have a vision, this is the thing I need to do today, that can be the path to the happiest life possible. Which in a lot of the ways I kind of empathize with. I mean, my best days are when I like wake up in the morning and say, oh, I know exactly what I want to do today. And it's like there's no choice, right? It sort of chose me.
Yeah. I think that's what I loved about the, Frisbee tournament, 2-3 games a day. Like when you're playing a game, there's the whole point of it is there's very little freedom of choice. There's options within this very, very proscribed set of rules. Like, I'm not worried.
But here, but I think this is interesting, because I think, and maybe, I don't know if Frisbee is sort of the best frame to look at this from, but I think there's sort of a paradox here. I think that when you have this, I wonder if it's when you have this trait of cognitive flexibility, and more generally, when you actually do have this sort of freedom to make choices, that it's in that context that you allow the best choice to come to you. So, again, there's sort of this satisfaction in having it choose you, but still there has to be ultimately sort of some kind of freedom behind that. I mean, if again, I don't know if the satisfaction that you describe being in the ultimate frisbee game of just playing game after game and just always knowing what you need to do is the same satisfaction that person trying to claw their way up to middle management every day is getting. I mean, are they, it both sound like there's a certain amount of restriction of your freedom and a certain limitation to choice, but do you get the same satisfaction in both scenarios?
Yeah, I'm sure if that was my career and people were paying me and they'd pay me more the more my team scored, that I would sour on it very quickly.
Yeah, well, that relates to the whole question of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. And that, as soon as you're being incentivized to do it and the incentives are obvious, it drains all the pleasure out of it.
Right. Yeah, but when you talked about cognitive flexibility, you're not just, at least in this article, you're not just talking about optionality. You're talking about identity, right? So that who you are and what's possible, what's okay for you. And use the example of a paralegal who discovers that her job has been largely replaced by AI, and how different people in that position with different degrees of cognitive flexibility would respond differently.
Yes. I think that identity is really a core element of this, because to reinvent yourself, I mean, well, to make a dramatic change in what you're doing, I think involves a certain element of reinventing yourself. It can't be divorced from identity. So when one changes careers like that, you really almost have to revise your sense of who you are. So I think cognitive flexibility, I think you can't dissociate it from identity.
Mm-hmm. But you, in your example, you say the person, with the paralegal with more cognitive flexibility could reinvent herself as an expert on the use of AI for drafting legal documents, which in some ways is a new definition, but it could also be simply a definition with a broader context. Like they're still in the the legal field, still about, but now they're just encompassing something, the way, let's say, I'm imagining, some of these folks, sort of aging tennis players who become pickleball players. They could still, like, for me to go to pickleball would be like a tragedy, but for like a lot of people, they seem to be fairly graceful in saying, I play racket sports and this is the one I'm playing now.
Yeah. Well, I see sort of your marketing background is coming out, Howie. So you're talking about how you package this thing, how you make it into a product. It's right. So, I mean, if you see now I'm playing pickleball as part of, this tennis player persona, that's, maybe you just sort of, it's sort of a different kind of packaging of the same thing. But I think, right. So a lot of reinventing yourself is maybe a sort of marketing. It's sort of, thinking of yourself as a product or something, and sort of reconceiving of it, what's the term they use? Relaunching it, mm-hmm. Right?
Right. But I think it's equally valid to call myself a tennis player or a racket sports player or an athlete or a human who likes to move.
Right.
Right. Like, but it
resonates, which of those resonates for you?
I think one of the things you're saying is that people with less cognitive flexibility tend to land on the more restrictive definitions. So that the change is a change as opposed to, a different flavor.
Yes, I think that's right. I think what distinguishes it, I don't know if I would say, okay, yes, you could think of it as the more narrow definition. But what I think distinguishes cognitive flexibility is that from one moment to the next, you can actually see different conceptions of yourself. You can almost, it involves a certain almost stepping back from yourself and saying, okay, so am I this? Am I that? Let's try this on. And then, you can revisualize it. You have that capability to do that, and willingness to do that. And part of it is a willingness to do that. If I think back, like 20 or 30 years, I think that I had, in some sense, the ability to do this kind of thing, but I was actually terrified of it. I would imagine reinventing myself, and I would say, and I would get this sense of vertigo. I would be like, oh, if I do that, then there's like, it's like, well, what's stopping me from, basically crazy things happening, from completely losing my sense of who I am, from re-envisioning myself as a monster, right? I mean, if I allow myself if all things are possible, then I could be a monster, and that was terrifying. I could be a mass murderer, right? That was terrifying, and reasonably so. But the thing is, so for me, what I'm saying is, it's not maybe that I became more cognitively flexible, but I became less afraid of it. I saw that possibility. I didn't shy away. I wonder whether most people, or indeed all people, have this ability, but there's a certain fear of it, that if I let myself do this, what does that mean could happen?
And I guess when we're talking about fears, they tend to be very interior, right? Sort of based on, for some people it could be a religious upbringing, or an upbringing with a lot of guilt and constraint. I'm finding myself wondering what it was like for you to go into the business world, knowing the socialist roots of your own upbringing. And at
Yes.
least, I don't think we ever talked explicitly about what we learned from our parents, but I learned that the bosses are bad.
Yeah, I learned some conflicting things from mine, and so yeah, as maybe your podcast viewers know, we both were raised in very liberal families, and my father was executive director at the ACLU for 15 years. Your father has a similar, sort of liberal, almost socialist background. The interesting thing about my father is that later on, he, after working in the nonprofit sector for a long time, he actually went to work for a law firm. Actually, before that, he worked as in-house counsel for a corporation. So he made that switch. And I remember watching him do that and feeling really kind of ambivalent about it as I watched him do it. I was like, I kind of saw my father as an idealist, and here he is deciding, that he'd like to have a company car and make some money. And he's telling me this. He's like, he tells me I really like making money. And I'm like, you can't do that. You're my father, and you're this idealist. I can't allow you to do that. But in some sense, he actually did give me a gift of saying, well, all these things are possible. There's, you can change it. You can change it up if you want to.
So when you went into the business world, were there, did you see that there were things that you had to do to prevent yourself from becoming a monster?
It wasn't so much that. What I learned in the business world was, yeah, it's funny. You sort of think about the ethical side of it. You're in the private sector. You're working for a corporation with shareholders, and you're trying to maximize profits, and so. And there were certainly things. So I worked in the sort of the biggest example of this. My main foray into the private sector, other than consulting, was working in the satellite communications industry. And one thing I did feel bad about was that, just whenever we launch a satellite, just, how much carbon we'd be pumping into the atmosphere to do that. Um, and there were a few other things that were like that. But what I found most notable about the private sector experience that turned me off to it was just how boring it was. I mean, I just felt like I wanted to do all these creative things and think of, and sort of think of great ideas and stuff. And I couldn't do that because my job was to do this very narrow thing and try to, it's like, okay, now put together a business plan for this venture that we want to do, which had this like, kind of a cookbook nature to it. And then you would create, but a lot of the time was not even creating the thing, but presenting it. I'd spent like 80% of my time just trying to create a PowerPoint deck out of it and then revise that PowerPoint deck. I'd present it to one manager and they would say, no, fix this deck so that when you show it to the next higher up person, it looks better. And so all this time was spent on the presentation and almost nothing on creating anything that was interesting to me. And even the things I was creating were just there was not much opportunity to do something interesting. Yeah. So what I found about the private sector was just, I don't know, that it was boring. I just, was like, why are we even doing this?
So I'm rereading Rutger Bregman's book, Moral Ambition. I don't know if you've seen it or. He basically argues that, human talent is the biggest wasted resource on the planet. And he says, why is it wasted? A bunch of people, live on $7 a day or less. And so we don't know how, but he's saying like, okay, let's forget about them. And let's just talk about the people who could be using their talents, who are just doing bullshit jobs. Right. And he says, like, we know what the important jobs are because they told us during the pandemic, like, people who make our food, farmers and nurses and street cleaners and like, the rest. Right. And the rest of us are doing, bullshit.
If you were just like bullshit workers, right? You're not essential. What you're doing is a waste of time. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, you make me think of, I can't remember who said most people live lives of quiet desperation. This was like an 19th century quote.
Thoreau.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, right.
So let's come back to us or to me. Like, I'm not living the activist life. Like I'm not 100% like throwing my energy. I'm not on a flotilla to try to, feed starving people in Gaza. Right. I'm like doing my thing here, doing consulting, working. There's a lot of, if you told me like, okay, everything will be okay, and I guarantee you income in perpetuity as long as you need it, I might do very different things. And it makes me wonder about people who do those things without those guarantees.
Yeah. Gosh, there's a lot to think about there. I mean, I sometimes think, what I'm doing. I mean, I love how I spend my days. I love teaching. I love, doing research, or just basically having the freedom to think. But I sometimes wonder, if I were going to allocate myself, if I were like, like God, and deciding, where should I send Matthew Nagler to do the most good? I mean, maybe I should be doing something. I should be spending my days like, 24/7 trying to combat climate change, right? How can I put into work, fixing this really big problem? Yeah. And that's, I struggle with that. I wonder if I'm doing things that because I enjoy them, and not because, it's necessarily doing the most good. That's a really tough question for me.
Now we're both depressed.
Thank you, Howard.
Yeah. Right. But, I mean, I also believe that, there's a higher reality or an underlying, oneness consciousness, and that, it's not just this materialist world, that that we do have callings to participate in the workings of the whole. And it's hard to say. Like I listened to a talk many years ago by Charles Eisenstein, who taught his basic subject was Nelson Mandela's grandmother, right? This woman who did almost nothing for the world except raise Nelson Mandela to be the man he became.
Oh, wow.
Right? And how,
Yeah.
how do you know what your teaching is accomplishing? And just, going to the store and being a decent person and smiling at cashiers and right. Like at some
Yeah.
point I want to have kind of faith that the position I'm in is the right position to be in.
Yeah. And that's actually sometimes the way I think about it. It's like, if I decided, okay, you're going to go, work on, I don't know, I can't think of what it is I would do in this sort of, if I were entering the infantry of, countering climate change, what would I do? Maybe I'd work on building windmills somewhere, and I'd have to learn a new trade and stuff like that. I don't know. I could be terrible at that, right? And then maybe I'd be miserable, and I wake up every morning, and every time I go to the store, I just grimace at the, clerks, or I grumble at them or something like that. I'd just be a completely miserable person to be around. What good am I, am I really doing the most good if I'm making people that I encounter miserable because I'm not doing the right thing? Whereas, I teach this semester, I'm teaching what I think about 130 students, of whom 110 are in one class and about 20 in the other. And it's like, so I am touching a lot of lives, and I'm so enthusiastic about it. I love what I do. And I get, I have to believe that because I'm enjoying myself and I am doing something which I think does good for these students, maybe I am doing the most good doing what I'm doing.
What in my first 5 years of teaching, I went to a workshop by a wonderful guy. He was part of the sort of the Quaker Education Network, and one of the exercises he had all us new teachers do was think of a student that we had sort of warm feelings towards, right? So it was kind of easy, like the good student who reminds us of ourselves at that age, or right, and then think about them growing into adulthood and the kind of influence we wanted to have on them. And I picked one of those kids, and that's been so many years ago, and I'm still in touch with the family, and like I don't know, there is something it was very clear to me that I was doing good things by examining my day to day through the lens of this telescopic legacy.
Yeah. That is one of the great things actually about teaching, is that you can very often make an effort to stay in touch with your former students and see, and remain kind of in some sense in their lives. I mean, you can, it depends partly on whether the student is interested, but if you remain in touch, I mean, very often they love to, be able to get back in touch with their former professors, and you can see the impact that you've had. You can see kind of what they went on to do, and that's enormously satisfying. I think, well, in the private sector, you don't really, if you produce a product, how often do you get to do that? I guess you can see people using your product and you get some satisfaction out of it, but it's not nearly as personal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I wanted to keep going with the cognitive flexibility to the sort of larger social point you were making around, identity and, freedom and constraint. Can you talk about that part of it? Because that got deep.
Yeah. So let's see. I mean, there's a number of, I think, social aspects. So one you're talking about there, I think you're referring to sort of this, almost paradoxical idea that having flexibility allows you to be in the situation where that one thing can call to you, where it's not really giving yourself freedom of choice, but giving freedom to be chosen.
Well, I was thinking about like the two paralegals, one of,
Oh,
right,
yeah,
like
yeah,
the whole
right.
thing, where we get to gender fluidity and divorce and all these
Yeah.
social intractable social issues because we all hate each other. And you took it to
Yeah.
this abstract level in
Yeah.
which there's freedom of understanding and a little grace.
That's actually what I wanted to get onto. Yeah. So when you think about flexibility in the individual context, it's all sort of well and good. You can see how a person might benefit from being able to reinvent themselves. But one point I make in the Substack piece, and this is also an element in the research that I'm working on, is that cognitive flexibility doesn't occur in a vacuum. So a person is flexible and makes choices and changes those choices. It affects other people. So, for example, in bilateral relationships, I give the example in the Substack piece of a person who is in a legal partnership and or a paralegal partnership, and they decide at some point to reinvent themselves, and it's like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm now going to be more, I'm going to reinvent myself as somebody who works with AI. Now it no longer makes sense. It makes sense for me to work in this partnership with this other person. Well, if the other person is not similarly flexible, and you unilaterally say, I'm leaving this partnership, then they're kind of left in the lurch. Okay. So decisions that we make around, who we are and what we're going to do affect other people. So, it can be in a business context, certainly in the context of a marriage, right? Okay. If one person decides, wait, this marriage is not right for me. I'm a different person now. And then they leave the marriage, that affects the other person who may not have felt similarly.
Or even in a marriage where I've seen a lot where one person decides they're anti-vax and another one becomes MAGA, and it's like, no,
right.
no, that's not who we agreed to be when we got
Yes.
together in the late 80s.
Yes, right. And all of this, it's interesting. This all sort of makes me think of James Carse's book, Finite and Infinite Games, where he sort of talks about a family as being. He says we have this sort of idea of the family as necessity, that you get married, you have a family, and then there's this sort of, now that we've created this, everybody's got to remain in this arrangement. Everybody's kind of locked into it. But he says, the family is a unit of choice, that we're all, that everybody is we're all individuals in this. We play roles, but there's the element of choice each day to participate. And we give other members of the family the freedom to be who they are. And we sort of think of it that way. It becomes much more invigorating. It becomes something that we all chose every day to participate in, to be a part of. So I kind of like that, but yeah, so right. But that doesn't, it's still a very complex thing. It's still very hard because we do have this tendency to think of these arrangements as some sense binding, and we have, and I think it's reasonable to think this way. We do sort of have this moral responsibility to other people, and when we make a choice for ourselves, there can be these externalities towards other people. But what I talk about in the piece, and I think this really sort of comes out of the research, is that there can be this tendency, therefore, to think of the cognitively flexible person as imposing outcomes on the other people in their lives. So, like, if I'm a paralegal, I choose to leave this partnership, and I say, hey, see ya, best of luck. I'm wronging the person who's left behind. Okay, but that's only one lens that you can look at this through. If you instead turn the tables, and let's say we made a law that says you're not allowed to dissolve a partnership like that, that you're going to face some huge penalty that would make it basically impossible for you to leave unless the other person agrees, then really it's the person who wants to remain in the partnership who is imposing a cost on you, who is making it impossible for you to do what's best for yourself. So what we have really is not a situation where flexible people create these messes, create these problems that other people have to clean up. But what we have is a problem of mismatch, that where in a world where some people have this fluid way of thinking and other people don't, there can be sort of a mismatch between the two where we just have to kind of work things out and figure out the best solution. And so let me give an example from the societal level. In a world in which certain people are more gender fluid, and they sort of realize that maybe the identity that they were born into, with their particular body is not who they are, then maybe their gender is different. For them, there's sort of this need to recognize who they really are. But certain people, feel put out by that. There's people that feel, hey, if you're I see you as a man and you decide to be a woman, then what that does is it sort of, it influences it cheapens my identity as a man. If what does it mean to be a man if you can just decide to change that? You're somehow imposing something on me. But if you flip the script there and say, okay, let's make some laws that don't make it possible for you to have that gender affirming surgery, then really what it is a society of people who have a rigid sense of gender identity imposing themselves on those people who don't. So what we have to do is, and this is not necessarily easy, but I think this is the lens through which you have to look at it, is we have to recognize that there are different types of people, and we have to recognize that we do impose these effects on one another living in a society together, and we have to somehow work it out. And that maps. So that what it does is it reframes the challenge. It's no longer sort of a situation where one person is necessarily harming another, but where we have this challenge of working out this issue of mismatch.
Has your research taken you into like how to operationalize solutions? Because I'm thinking to myself that it kind of, like the people who are much more likely to be cognitively flexible are the people who are much more likely to go, yeah, Matt, that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's no, I mean, not yet. I guess the answer is not yet. The research is kind of evolving, and I presented this. I decided to write this up in my Substack while I was really kind of 40% of the way into developing the model. So I've completely developed an individual model. I've begun to develop the bilateral model, and I also have a social model in mind as well. And so as I'm developing this, my intention is to think more about policy sort of as the results are more fleshed out. But I think it definitely does inform the policy options. I think if we recognize what we have on our hands as mismatch, then we can think, okay, well, it's not about necessarily making a law one way or the other, but maybe about creating systems that, I'm an economist, so I think about systems of economic, sort of compensations that we can almost sort of contract between each other and set things up in such a way such that, we can work things out through that sort of economic system by payments one way or the other. One thing you can do is you can create liquidated damages contracts, right? Where if a person does something, flexibility really is so beneficial to me that I'm going to get this great benefit from it. Well, with liquidated damages contract, what I can do is it allows me to sort of share some of that wealth with the person who's not as flexible, and so we all sort of benefit. So there's sort of ways of thinking about it that way, where really what flexibility creates is it creates the opportunity for additional benefits that can be exploited and shared and enjoyed by everybody. So if they can be somehow shared around in a way that that makes everybody better off, then I think we've done the most good.
Yeah, for me, that comes right back around to the deal or no deal, right? Where if you're framing it as here's my penalty for being flexible, as opposed to here's a way to share the wealth, like those feel completely different.
Yeah, or what doesn't happen in deal or no deal, at least I've never seen this happen, is you have two people in this decision-making situation where it's going to be in some sense zero sum, and are they ever given the opportunity to make some kind of a side deal where they say, hey, let's do this. Let's just agree to split everything 50-50.
That is so that is so funny, because as I was watching this show, first of all, I've seen like the gestalt of the American show. It seems very like blue and high tech and a little dystopian. Yeah. But the Italian show, like all the contestants would come out and do dances together, and the audience would be clapping and singing, and they had all these different, meme songs. And then one of the things you could get is the little dog comes out and like dances for treats. So, it felt like I was watching, and these people all in the studio audience and the contestants, like they seemed happy. And I was thinking, like, could you create a game show that would like improve the quality of life of humanity? Where, like there's all these, the prisoner's dilemma game, and economists and behavioral economists are constantly coming up with stuff where,
or Golden Ball. Was it called Golden Balls? I think was that game, right? Wasn't that was the prisoner's dilemma game? I think.
Yeah.
Where you had to get together and make some kind of agreement, and otherwise you're both worse off. And then finally there was this episode where somebody actually realized that, and they said, no, I'm going to do this thing, which seems like wrong for me to do. Oh. And then they completely changed the game, and it was the first time, like
Golden Ball. I never heard of that.
Yeah, since one. Yeah, I think it's called Golden Balls. Yeah.
Oh, but just, this idea that could you create a game show that it's almost like a reality show, in like completely opposite from Survivor or Big Brother or all those that are the basically musical chairs. Like we're just humans are just watching people play musical chairs, and we're going, well, that's human nature. Like, could you create? Yeah. What could we create that would like show that that altruism is like just so much better?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think there's, at least in America, our entertainment is just so gladiatorial, right? It's everybody wants to watch somebody lose, right? They want to watch this, one person just. It's like professional wrestling. I mean, so much of our entertainment is like professional wrestling. It's just you want to watch somebody get thrashed. I mean, I don't know. I can only speak from my own personal tastes. Is like I don't watch television anymore because I don't want to watch any of that. So I mean, but yeah, I think I would love to see more narratives in our entertainment that are about, that are just uplifting, that are about how can we see the most good in people rather than the worst. I'm not. I mean, I don't know. Maybe some of the superhero movies are not like this, but I've just been avoiding the entire superhero genre because I'm just assuming it's dark. That there are these just like ugly villains, and then there's these like superheroes that are just like individuals who are just that everybody depends upon the super strong individual to save us from all these forces of evil. It's just so. Yeah. I don't know. It's just not the narrative. I don't like that narrative.
I want to create a game show. I'm really excited now. So
that's our next project, Howie.
I'm serious. I think media tells us who we are.
Yeah.
And we're so polarized, and it's so zero sum. And what I love about, your exploration of the a continuum of flexibility is that it reminds me of when I was studying a negotiation theory and conflict resolution, that we're always, the first thing we're trying to get to is the third story, right? There's I'm right and you're wrong, and you go, you're right and I'm wrong. And then there's a third story that we
Yes.
can both agree upon that is,
Yes.
right, that takes the sting out of it, that acknowledges it's like the two of us are standing shoulder to shoulder looking at the problem, describing it, as opposed to seeing each other as the
Right.
problem. Um,
Right.
and
Yeah. And parts. Go ahead.
I think humans, I think we could be wired this way. I think it's easy enough for us to be kind to each other.
Well, I think what you described in that scenario of coming up with that third framing is, I kind of heard you say this as part of that, is that in that situation, we step back from ourselves. It requires the two parties to sort of step out of themselves, almost almost onto the sidelines, and you're seeing the two people at opposite ends, but you're both stepping out of those and standing together on the side and looking and saying, okay, we're now outside of ourselves. Now, what do we want to do with those two people and how they're working these things out? So there's this, removing, getting a remove from yourself that takes place here, sort of shedding the ego. That's a part of doing that. That's of course, that has a large role in a lot of Zen philosophy.
Yeah. And I think that's what I was saying about ultimate is like, before the game, we all agree we have to work together. We have to collaborate to create the game. And afterwards,
Yes.
ultimate specific, I think is a great example because we have the spirit of the game rule.
Yes.
That's baked into the rule. You take responsibility for your own play. You take responsibility for the quality of the experience for everyone. That we, and then we go into the game pretending that it matters for the sake of the game.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean, it's interesting, sort of pretending that it matters, because again, this is sort of something that we do when we play games to win, is that we it's a lot of it is pretending that it matters, but paradoxically, we make the value of winning, of playing, when you play a game that, because as if it matters, you're playing to win, right? So we play ultimate frisbee to win, we play football to win, whatever sport we play, also what we do in life, right? Like, I take on the role of a investment banker, I play to win, right? But you can also kind of step back from that and look at that and say, I have decided to take on this role and to play to win, to create the game, to create a game that is worth playing.
Yeah.
Because, and it's that recognition that I've created a game that's worth playing that is really what it's all about, not the winning itself. But, but there's a paradox, at the one hand, it has to feel like it matters. On the other hand, you have to, sort of see it from above.
Right. Oh, like, this is the prize that, the difference is a mouse pad versus, $110 million a year contract for the best, the best compensated soccer player in the world. So.
Right. But all you really need is a mouse pad,
That's so true.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, yeah. What's that?
I was going to say, isn't that interesting? I mean, that's the point. There have to be stakes, but they don't have to be so damn big,
Yeah, and I guess if the stakes don't have to it's more the negative stakes of the stakes of losing, right? That gets back to that fear. Like I'll have nothing, or I won't survive, or life will be intolerable. or I won't be able to live with myself. If we could create games in which, you know, there is no, existential risk to losing.
Do you remember back when we were in middle school or high school, there was this thing called New Games? Do you remember that? Probably on the biology camp picture. Remember what the motto was? Play hard, play fair, nobody hurt.
I had both of those books. I became a teacher. I taught PE. That was like, but they didn't really like those games because.
Oh, that's right. And the funny thing was, I think I remember playing those New Games, and there was this one particular one. I can't remember what it was called, but people were always getting hurt. It was the one where you had to wrestle people and throw them outside of the bounds of the game. Do you remember that one? You'd be all crawling around on your knees, and you'd grab a person, and you'd be on your knees, and you'd have to throw them out of the bounds, and then they were out of the game. Do you remember that one?
No, that sounds.
That was one of the New Games, and it was called. It had some kind of name. It had some kind of, I don't know. It did sound a little dystopian. It was like, I don't know. I can't remember what it was, but
now I'm going to archive.org. I'm going to find that one because I don't remember it. No. All right. Well, I think we got a good one in the can. It whets my appetite for hearing what you're going to be thinking about next. Let people know where they can find you and your Substack.
Yeah. So, I guess, should I share that with you or get put it in the chat? But anyway, my Substack.
Not everybody goes to the show notes. I'm sad to say some people just listen.
Yeah. So my Substack is called Zen and Economics, and I think if you look up Zen and Economics, you'll find it. But it's matthewgnagler.substack.com is the link. And I come out with something every month, and sometimes it has to do with my research. Most of the time it doesn't. Always it has a little something to do with economics, and usually it has a lot to do with enlightenment.
Right on.
So whatever that means.
Okay.
Or whatever it happened to mean to me that particular month.
And the occasional dose of Billy Joel.
And the occasional dose of Billy Joel, or in the most recent one, U2, in fact.
Very good. All right, Matt, always a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me on, Howie. I really enjoyed it.
Let's get a new one sooner rather than later.
Agreed. All right. Thanks again.
And that's a wrap. You can check out the show notes by searching for my guest's name, Matthew Nagler. That's Nagler. He's been on a bunch of times. This will be the most recent one. I don't have the number off the top of my head. But I wanted to say two things before we get into movement news. One is, you may have noticed that I've taken a break from releasing weekly episodes of the podcast. That's part of a larger life thing that I'm experiencing right now, around slowing down and figuring out. I just turned 60 over the summer to figure what do I want to do next for the next 60 years or 40 or 20 or week, whatever the universe has in store for me. And so I have been slowing down and taking some time off. I do have some episodes in the can, which I will be producing and sharing, and some interviews with people coming up that I think you're going to really like. But I just wanted to kind of say aloud that you haven't been seeing episodes lately because I haven't been producing them. And as the hiatus continues, I'm getting more and more excited about new conversations, different kinds of conversations, and maybe a little more courage and boldness in the topics that I cover. Second thing is, the shirt's different, and I want to show off. This is the first merch from Plant Yourself Podcast that I own. And my daughter Yvonne drew this. It's the podcast logo, and it's on t-shirts. It can be on different color t-shirts. You can do, we also have a white shirt with a light blue instead of the three color. And you can get it on other things as well. And if you want to get more of that, go to plantyourself.com. And right at the top is a bar that says Get Merch. So if you would like to walk around with this imagery on your body, that's how you do it. Okay, and now to movement news. I have been injured. I think I actually got COVID. I didn't test at the time, but had a bad cold and lots of coughing, couldn't sleep at night. And then, like 3 weeks later, every time I went to work out, I started feeling sick again. And I've been checking around that apparently that's pretty common with the strains that are going around now. I'm finally feeling better, although I still have some congestion. I've been doing some qigong for lung healing. And hopefully everything that I'm doing is going to continue making a difference. But the activity has been mostly walking and slowly getting back to more effort. There have been some frisbee tournaments that I have dabbled in, just playing a few points just to get out there and not feel jealous of the other people who are running around. And so hopefully, by spring, when the season starts up again here in Europe, I'll be better than ever. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends.